Shadows in the void. The void between stars was silent as the Hegemony patrol ship Dominant Claw glided through the darkness. Commander Zarak stood on the bridge, his scaled skin reflecting the soft blue light of the displays. The Draconid officer watched his crew with practiced indifference. This patrol route was routine, boring, even monitoring the outer reaches of Hegemony space where nothing ever happened. "Sir, we're detecting an anomaly at coordinates 87 to 4219, reported the sensor officer, her antenna twitching with surprise. Zarak flicked his tail impatiently. "Specify." "Unknown vessel. Adrift. No power signature, no response to hails. It doesn't match any known configuration in our database." That was unusual. The galactic hegemony had cataloged every spacefaring species in this sector over the last 1,000 years. An unknown ship design shouldn't exist. "Full scan. Approach with caution," Zarak ordered, suddenly alert. Perhaps this patrol wouldn't be so routine after all. As they drew closer, the ship came into view on the main screen, a sleek obsidian craft with lines that seemed to absorb rather than reflect light. It was undamaged but completely dark, drifting silently like a ghost ship from ancient tales. "Scans indicate it's been adrift for approximately 50 cycles," the science officer reported. "There's a single life sign aboard, but it's faint. Species unknown." The crew exchanged nervous glances. Despite commanding 37 different species, the hegemony rarely encountered truly unknown entities. "Prepare a boarding party," Zarak said. "I'll lead it myself." Hours later, Zarak stepped through the airlock onto the alien vessel, accompanied by 4 armed security officers and a medical technician. Their suit lights cut through the darkness of the ship's interior. The architecture was strange, minimalist yet somehow advanced, with smooth curves and interfaces unlike anything in hegemony design philosophy. "This technology," muttered one of the officers, running a scanner over a panel. "It's beyond our current understanding." Zarak silenced him with a gesture. They moved deeper into the ship, following the life sign. The corridors were empty of crew, as if the vessel had been abandoned, or perhaps had never needed a full complement in the first place. They found the survivor in what appeared to be the command center. A single occupant slumped in a chair before a dead console. The being was bipedal, hairless except for the top of its head, with pale skin now turned ashen. It wore a form-fitting uniform of some dark material. "Is it one of the mythical humans?" whispered the medical technician, her voice tinged with disbelief. Zarak snorted. "Humans are stories to frighten hatchlings. This is likely some unknown subspecies of the Talman." The medical technician approached carefully, scanning the being. "Life signs critical but stabilizing with our presence. The atmosphere's been preserved in this section, but nutrients depleted weeks ago. It's in a self-induced hibernation state." As if on cue, the being's eyes flickered open, brown irises focusing slowly on the boarding party. It spoke, its voice dry and cracked, in perfect galactic standard. "You shouldn't have come. They'll know you found me." Zarak stepped forward. "I am Commander Zarak of the galactic hegemony vessel Dominant Claw. Identify yourself." The being coughed weakly. "Captain Elijah Chen, Earth Defense Force. Human, in case that wasn't obvious." The boarding party went absolutely still. Humans were myths, beings from legends said to have challenged the precursors of the hegemony countless generations ago before disappearing. Tales spoke of their incredible adaptability, their unpredictable tactics, their terrifying tenacity, but they were just stories. They had to be. "Impossible," Zarak said flatly. "Humans are extinct, if they ever existed at all." Chen laughed, a hollow sound that turned into another cough. "That's exactly what we wanted you to believe. We've been watching from the shadows for centuries." The medical technician had recovered from her shock and was administering emergency nutrients to the human. "Commander, this being is genuine. Its physiological structure matches no known species in our database, but it does align with the mythological descriptions of humans." Zarek's scales flattened against his skull, a sign of deep distress among Draconids. If you are human, explain your presence here, alone, in a dead ship. Chen's eyes darted to each member of the boarding party before settling back on Zarak. I was on a reconnaissance mission. My stealth systems failed during a solar flare. I've been adrift, in and out of cryo-sleep, hoping to die before anyone found me. Because now they'll come looking. Who will come looking? Where are the rest of your kind? Demanded Zarak. Hidden. Safe. Chen's voice grew stronger as the nutrients took effect. We retreated from galactic affairs centuries ago, when we realized what was happening. The hegemony was consuming everything, homogenizing all cultures into one. We decided to disappear rather than be absorbed. Before Zarak could respond, one of the security officers called from across the command center. Commander, I've accessed some of their databanks. You need to see this. On a small screen, now powered by their equipment, flowed images that chilled Zarak's blood. Vast fleets of ships, larger and more advanced than anything the hegemony possessed. Stations hidden in nebulae and asteroid fields. Planets shielded by technology that would make them appear uninhabitable to standard scans. Humanity hadn't gone extinct. They had gone into hiding, watching, waiting, and apparently growing stronger. This can't be real, Zarak whispered, but the evidence was right before him. It's real, Chen said. We've been observing the hegemony for generations. You conquered our allies, claimed our former colonies, and rewrote history to make us into myths. We withdrew to prepare. Prepare for what? Zarak asked, though he dreaded the answer. To return, Chen said simply. The reclamation project is nearly complete. Before anyone could question further, alarms blared throughout the ship. The security officer at the terminal looked up in panic. Commander, something's happening. The ship is powering up. Chen smiled grimly. Dead man's switch. If my life signs stabilized while non-humans were present, it triggers the beacon. What beacon? Zarak demanded, grabbing Chen by the collar. The one that tells the fleet where I am, and that I've been found by the hegemony. Chen's eyes reflected the suddenly illuminating emergency lights. You should run, Commander. You have maybe an hour before they arrive. Zarak released Chen and barked orders to his team. Back to the ship. Now. To Chen, he said, you're coming with us. The human didn't resist as they half-carried him back to the dominant claw. As they departed the dead ship, no longer dead, its systems humming with awakened power, Zarak ordered an immediate retreat to hegemony space. But it was already too late. 3 jumps away from the encounter site, deep in what should have been safe territory, the dominant claw emerged from FTL to find itself surrounded. 7 ships of unknown configuration, sleek, dark, and terrible in their silent efficiency, formed a perfect containment pattern around them. Hegemony vessel, came a voice over their communication system. You have something that belongs to us. The voice was calm, conversational even, but it sent chills through every member of the crew. It was the voice of something that had been waiting patiently for a very long time, something that was no myth at all. On the medical deck, Captain Elijah Chen opened his eyes and smiled. The reclamation had begun. Admiral Vexus of the Hegemony Strategic Command stared at the report before him, his 4 eyes blinking in rapid succession, a sign of extreme agitation among his kind. You expect me to believe, he said slowly to the intelligence officer standing before him, that Commander Zarak encountered actual humans, the same humans from children's tales. The intelligence officer, a tall, insectoid Kryvax, clicked her mandibles nervously. The evidence is compelling, Admiral. The dominant claw transmitted its findings just before contact was lost. The physiological scans, the technology samples, the ship design, they all align with fragmented historical records from before the Great Purge. The Great Purge, when the early hegemony had deliberately erased certain parts of galactic history to strengthen its position. Records deemed destabilizing were destroyed, including most information about several species that had opposed hegemony formation. Vexus leaned back in his chair. Even if these are humans, which I very much doubt, they'd been gone for over 500 cycles. They would be primitive compared to our current technology. With respect, Admiral, that's not what the data suggests. The intelligence officer activated a holographic display showing the last images transmitted by the dominant claw, the 7 ships that had surrounded it. Our analysts estimate these vessels possess technology at least 3 generations beyond our most advanced designs. Vexus stared at the hologram, his earlier dismissiveness fading. Where did they come from? How could they have developed such technology in isolation? Unknown, sir, but there's more. The officer hesitated. In the final transmission, Commander Zarek mentioned something called the Reclamation Project. He seemed frightened. Vexus had known Zarek, a stolid, dependable officer not given to flights of fancy or fear. If something had frightened him, increase alert status throughout the sector, Vexus ordered. Deploy the 3rd Fleet to the encounter coordinates. If these really are humans, I want them contained and studied. But deep in his 4 hearts, Vexus felt something he hadn't experienced in centuries of service. Doubt. The stories of humans had persisted despite the purge. Tales of a species that refused to surrender, that fought with unexpected strategies, that adapted to overcome any obstacle. Stories that always ended with the humans disappearing, not defeated but withdrawing by choice. What if they had simply been biding their time? As Vexus issued his orders, automated systems throughout hegemony space began detecting anomalies. Communications glitches, power fluctuations, navigation errors, small issues easily dismissed as routine malfunctions. By the time anyone realized, they were the first signs of a coordinated infiltration centuries in the making. It would be far too late. The myths were awakening, and they had not forgotten. The awakening storm. The Hegemony Central Command on Nexus Prime was in chaos. Reports flooded in from across 20 sectors. Communications outages, defense grid failures, and most alarming of all, entire outposts going silent. Admiral Vexus stood before the strategic holotable, watching as red alert indicators multiplied across the 3-dimensional map of hegemony space. How is this possible? Demanded High Counselor Draz, his ceremonial robes fluttering as he paced. The usually composed Valerian skin had turned a pale yellow, a sign of extreme stress in his species. You're telling me that humans, creatures of legend, have infiltrated our most secure systems? The evidence is now irrefutable, Vexus replied, his 4 eyes fixed on a new cluster of alerts appearing in Sector 12. They've been planning this for centuries. Every system affected shows signs of dormant code that's been embedded for decades, possibly longer. The doors to the command center hissed open as Chief Science Advisor Tella rushed in, clutching a data tablet. The diminutive Malorian's gills pulsed rapidly with agitation. Admiral, Counselor, I've completed the analysis of the captured human vessel. What we found. She paused, her voice trembling. Their technology isn't just advanced. It's evolved along an entirely different path than ours. They don't use quantum singularity drives or graviton matrices. Their systems operate on principles we barely understand. Vexus narrowed his eyes. Explain in terms we can use strategically, Advisor. Tella nodded. Their ships can move without traditional propulsion, masking their energy signatures completely. They've developed a form of instantaneous communication that bypasses our subspace relays and their defensive capabilities. She hesitated again. They'd weaponized dimensional phasing. A heavy silence fell over the command center. Dimensional phasing had been a theoretical concept in hegemony science for centuries, the ability to shift partially between dimensional states, allowing matter to pass through solid objects or energy fields. If humans had weaponized such technology, how many ships have we confirmed? Draz asked quietly. 47 directly observed across hegemony space, Vexus answered. But given their stealth capabilities, there could be hundreds more. The holotable suddenly flickered, the strategic display dissolving into static before reforming into a single human face. A female with dark skin, silver-streaked hair pulled tightly back, and eyes that reflected centuries of patience. "Greetings, leaders of the galactic hegemony," she said, her voice calm and measured. "I am Admiral Helena Zhao of the Earth Defense Force. After 500 years of observation, we have determined that diplomatic contact is now necessary. How dare you breach our secure channels?" Draz sputtered, but the human continued as if she hadn't heard him. "Your empire has expanded unchecked for too long, absorbing autonomous species and erasing their unique cultures. You rewrote history to suit your narratives. You declared us myths when we chose to withdraw rather than be subjugated." Vexus stepped forward. "If you're proposing war, human, know that the hegemony controls over 10,000 worlds. Your species, however advanced, cannot hope to prevail." Admiral Zhao smiled slightly. "We're not proposing war, Admiral Vexus. We're proposing a correction. Even now, your defensive systems are being temporarily neutralized. Your weapons platforms disabled. Your fleets immobilized. Not destroyed. Merely paused." As if to confirm her words, alerts began flashing across the remaining functional screens. Reports of hegemony warships suddenly powerless, drifting in space. Defense stations going offline across dozens of systems simultaneously. "Impossible," whispered Tella, checking readings on her tablet. "They've implemented a cascading tachyon field disruption across our entire territorial space. The coordination required would be beyond your understanding." Zhao completed. "We've had centuries to prepare, studying your every weakness while you dismissed us as legends. The human talent for asymmetric warfare hasn't diminished during our absence." Draz, recovering his composure, drew himself up. "What are your demands, then?" "Territory. Resources." "We demand nothing except acknowledgement and truth," Zhao replied. "The hegemony will recognize the sovereignty of humanity and all other species. You will cease your forced cultural assimilation policies, and you will restore the historical records you purged during your rise to power." Before anyone could respond, a junior officer burst into the command center. "Admiral, multiple unknown vessels have appeared in orbit around Nexus Prime. They're everywhere." The holographic display shifted to show the space around the hegemony capital world. Hundreds of ships had seemingly materialized from nowhere, sleek, black vessels that absorbed rather than reflected light, surrounding the planet in perfect formation. Not firing, not threatening, simply present, an undeniable statement of capability. "As a gesture of our peaceful intentions," Admiral Zhao continued, "we have calculated that your central power reactor will experience a catastrophic failure in approximately 30 minutes due to a design flaw your engineers overlooked. We've taken the liberty of implementing a temporary fix that will stabilize the system until permanent repairs can be made. The technical specifications are being transmitted to Science Advisor, Tella's personal device now." Tella's tablet chimed, and her eyes widened as she scrolled through the incoming data. "She's right," the Science Advisor gasped. "These calculations, how could we have missed this?" Vexus and Draz exchanged glances. The message was clear. The humans could have chosen destruction, but had opted for salvation instead. "You have one standard rotation to consider our terms," Zhao said. "We will remain in position until then. If you require assistance with any critical systems during this time, you need only ask. We've been watching over you for longer than you realize." The transmission ended, leaving the command center in stunned silence. On the flagship of the human fleet, the Remembrance, Admiral Zhao stepped away from the communications array and turned to her senior staff. "And now we wait," she said. Her XO, Commander Jackson, frowned. "Do you really think they'll agree to our terms without further demonstrations?" Zhao walked to the viewport, gazing down at the gleaming metropolis that covered much of Nexus Prime. "They don't have much choice. But more importantly, they just realized that everything they thought they knew about power dynamics in this galaxy was wrong. An elderly man seated in the corner of the bridge spoke up. His uniform was different from the others, more ceremonial, marked with symbols of Earth's ancient nations now united. "Admiral Zhao is right," said Secretary General Chen, his voice carrying the weight of his 120 years of age, preserved by the same medical technology that had allowed humanity to play the long game. "Fear would only build resentment. Respect will build a foundation for cooperation." Besides, Zhao added with a slight smile, "We've already won. Victory isn't measured by how many ships you destroy, but by how thoroughly you change your enemy's perception of reality." Commander Jackson nodded slowly. 500 years of patience, infiltration, and preparation, all for this moment. "Not just for this moment," corrected Secretary General Chen. "For all the moments that will follow. Humanity didn't withdraw to plot revenge. We withdrew to ensure survival, ours and eventually theirs." On a secondary screen, they watched as hegemony leaders across 24 worlds held emergency sessions. Debates raged, accusations flew, but underlying it all was the undeniable realization that the galaxy they thought they ruled had always contained powers they never truly understood. Sensors indicated that 3 hegemony vessels were cautiously approaching the Remembrance. Not with weapons charged, but with communications arrays active. "It seems they've decided not to wait the full rotation," Zhao observed. "Open a channel." The face of Admiral Vexus appeared on screen, his 4 eyes blinking more slowly now, a sign of careful control among his kind. "Admiral Zhao," he began formally, "the Hegemony Council requests a direct meeting. Not to contest your terms, but to better understand the species we so grievously mischaracterized." Zhao nodded. "We would welcome such a dialogue, Admiral Vexus. There is one question I must ask now, however," Vexus continued. "Your infiltration of our systems, your technological superiority. You could have destroyed us at any time during the past centuries. Why didn't you?" Zhao considered the question carefully before answering. "Because annihilation isn't progress, Admiral. 500 years ago, humanity fought among itself almost to extinction before we unified. We recognized in the early hegemony the same patterns that nearly destroyed us. The drive to conquer, to assimilate, to homogenize all that is diverse and unique." She leaned forward slightly. "We didn't withdraw to plot your destruction. We withdrew to give both our civilizations time. Time for you to realize the limitations of your path, and time for us to develop the means to show you alternatives. Today isn't an ending. It's a course correction." Vexus was silent for a long moment. "I'd understand," he finally said, and Zhao could see in his eyes that perhaps he truly did. "We will prepare for your delegation." As the transmission ended, Secretary General Chen rose from his seat and joined Zhao at the viewport. 500 years ago," he said quietly, "my ancestor Elijah Chen was part of the team that proposed the reclamation project. He never lived to see this day." "Few of the originators did," Zhao acknowledged. "It took incredible faith to commit to a plan that would only bear fruit centuries later." "That's always been humanity's greatest strength," Chen replied. "Not our technology or our tenacity, impressive as those may be. It's our ability to plant trees knowing we'll never sit in their shade." Below them, the lights of Nexus Prime continued to glitter, unaware that this day marked not the beginning of a war, but the end of an empire and the birth of something new. 1 standard year later, the former Hegemony Council chamber had been transformed. Where once only the ruling species had held seats of authority, now representatives from hundreds of worlds, including many that had been designated as protectorates or client states, gathered as equals. High Counselor Draz, now serving as transitional coordinator, called the assembly to order. "Today marks the first full session of the Galactic Confederation," he announced. "A union of free worlds bound not by conquest, but by mutual interest and respect for diversity." In the diplomatic section, Admiral Zhao, now Ambassador Zhao, sat beside Secretary General Chen. They watched with quiet satisfaction as species that had been subjugated for generations took their places in the new order. Was it worth the wait? Chen asked softly. Zhao considered the chamber, the new alliances forming, the old powers learning to share authority rather than impose it. 500 years to change the course of galactic history without a war of extinction. Yes, I'd say it was. A young aide approached them, bowing respectfully. Ambassador, Secretary General, the Historical Restoration Committee has completed its work. The full records of pre-hegemony history, including humanity's early role in galactic affairs, have been restored to the Central Archives. Chen nodded in approval. No more myths or legends. Just truth, however complex or uncomfortable. Across the chamber, Admiral Vexus approached them. Though no longer the military leader he once was, he had found a new purpose as a reformer within his own government. Ambassador Zhao, Secretary Chen, he greeted them. I just received word that the technology exchange programs have begun on 17 worlds. Your engineers are most patient with our scientists. Cultural exchange is equally important, Zhao replied. Your artistic traditions have already fascinated many on Earth. Vexus hesitated, then spoke more quietly. There are still those who resent humanity's intervention, who see your actions as humiliation rather than salvation. There always will be, Chen acknowledged. Change is never easy, especially for those who benefited most from the old order. But the alternative was far worse. You refer to the simulations you showed us, Vexus said. The projections that the hegemony would have collapsed into civil war within 50 cycles. Zhao nodded. A pattern repeated throughout human history. Empires that grow too large, too rigid, too homogenized eventually fracture, often violently. By intervening as we did, we spared trillions from that fate. The chamber lights dimmed slightly, indicating the session was about to begin in earnest. Around them, hundreds of species, some barely known to each other before the reclamation, prepared to shape a new galactic society together. I must admit, Vexus said, his voice carrying a hint of wonder, when I first learned humans were real, I feared the legends of your warlike nature were true. I expected vengeance, not this. Chen smiled. The legends weren't wrong, just incomplete. Humanity can be terrifying in war, yes, but our greatest achievements have always come from creating peace where none seemed possible. As Vexus departed to take his seat, Zhao turned to Chen. Speaking of legends, I received a report this morning from Deep Space Monitoring. There are indications of organized activity beyond the galactic rim. Chen raised an eyebrow. The rumors were true then. There are older powers out there. It seems so, Zhao confirmed, which means our work is far from over. The Confederation will need to be strong and united when first contact occurs. Chen gazed around the chamber, at the hundreds of species now working together after centuries of domination and resistance. Then it's fortunate we've had practice at bringing unlikely allies together. The session began, and with it, the next chapter in a galaxy where humans had returned from myth to reshape reality. Not through conquest, but through patience, strategy, and the unshakable belief that better futures were worth waiting centuries to create. In the shadows beyond known space, ancient eyes turned toward the rising Confederation, curious about the species that had transformed an empire without firing a shot. The humans had reclaimed their place in galactic history, but history itself was far from finished with them. The legends, it seemed, were only beginning.